Hi there, welcome to another session of Drill Dev Apps. In this session, we are going to see how passwordless authentication work and what is the use cases of passwordless authentication between servers. So some common use cases are server to server communication. So normally to connect to any server or if you want to establish a connection between one server to another server, normally you need IP address, username and password. So without these also we can log in if we have SSH keys. So in that case, if we are using SSH keys, we can ensure that communication between the servers will happen without any need of having a passwords, and then it will be more secure. We don't need to store these passwords or passwords in any of these configuration files or in any of the scripts, automated scripts that we are running. So basically, it will reduce the risk of exposing our sensitive information like passwords, or if it is exposed, it will have some unauthorized accesses and all, which is not a good practice. So that is where we use server to server communication and the automated scripting and cron jobs. So what does that mean? Like if we are having some automation scripts, like we are trying to do the disaster recovery where we are syncing the data from one server to another, or if we are having some scheduled task, or if we are having some backup activities happening in a day or in night. So during that time, if we don't want to manually intervene between the servers when the task is performing, so that time we will enable this passwordless authentication, which will make sure that there is no manual intervention is needed while running the script. Otherwise, if you don't enable this passwordless authentication at some point when you are trying to connect to the remote server, it will hold for manual input of the password. So it will hold the terminal and ask for password. Until password is entered, it will not go to the next step. So that is where this passwordless authentication will enable the user or one who runs the automation without any manual intervention. There is no need of manual intervention to run the scripts. So that is automated scripting and cron jobs. So on configuration management is another one use case or a scenario where when you are performing management, or when you are trying to manage multiple servers or like hundreds of servers, you cannot manually go to each and every server by giving username and password to connect and run some backup activities or do some tasks that is required for applications, or you wanted to perform any deployments. You don't need to have this username and password scenario where you can store it somewhere and pass it every time for performing deployments. Instead, you can create SSH keys, and you can have a common keys where it will one in such scenarios you can consider taking an example of Ansible. Ansible is a configuration management tool which works on the keys. So in Ansible, we will be creating one keys, public key and private key. We will be keeping all public key in all the remote machines and private key in the machine or in the Ansible machine on Ansible host. From Ansible host, it will try to connect to the remote servers, and it will perform tasks and it will come back safely. So in that way, you can ensure that this communication is secure and everything is done in a standard way. So that is where we go for configuration management and cloud infra management as well. So when we are provisioning multiple servers and users are trying to access those servers, at that time you cannot provide everyone the username and password of all the servers that we are creating, and it's a dynamic infrastructure. You cannot keep giving the IP addresses every day, because when you are using dynamic infrastructure, IP address changes every time. IP address or host name or public DNS is going to change. Also private IPs and private DNS as well. So to mitigate that issue, we can create some common keys and put it in one jump host, or we can call it as Bastion host. From there, user can log into Bastion host. From there, anyone can access any of the cloud servers. So in that way, we can use cloud infra management as well. So for remote server management, this is very helpful for the server administrators or any operations engineer who is managing on-premises or remote machines. or to log in and do some task or perform some patching activity. At that time, he cannot manually log into each and every machine. Instead, he can log in from instead if he creates this passwordless authentication. If he enables that, then it is very easy for him to manage the other remote machines. Okay, so these are some common use cases we can think of. Now let's see how to enable passwordless authentication by taking AWS servers as an example. We'll take two servers. One is Linux, Red Hat Linux, and the other one is Ubuntu machine. So two comes under Linux distros, but both are from different families. One is Red Hat distribution, the other one is uh, Debian distribution. Now let's go to AWS console. Okay, here we are going to launch two instances. One is from Red Hat, the other one is Ubuntu, which is Debian. Okay, let's launch an EC2 instance. Okay, we are giving a name to our instance as Red Hat Linux and Real DevOps, and we are going to select Red Hat. We'll go with free tier. We are taking the instance type as T2 micro, which is free tier eligible. Now let's create one uh, name to our key pair. So we are creating two different key pairs for these two different machines. So I'm going to create new key pair. So I'm going to give the name here, and I'm using prem file, which is private key file with extension .prem. So I've got my prem file to my downloads, and then I'll see my security. I'm just enabling 22 port, and I'm adding some volume, which is default 10 GB, and launch instance. So this has launched my EC2 machine, which is from Red Hat Linux. Okay, meanwhile, before it comes, let's start one more instance. So I'm going to launch Ubuntu DevOps. Okay. So here I'll select one Ubuntu machine. Again, I'm going with free tier eligible. So I'll be taking T2 micro, which is free tier. Let's create one more new key pair. So here we'll give Ubuntu Drill DevOps. Okay, this is our key name for Ubuntu machine. Let's create a key. So I've got key. So both are the one for previous instance, and now both are private key files. We are allowing 22 port. Default it is adding some storage. Let's launch it. Okay, my other Red Hat machine is up and running. So status checks are pending. Let's wait for this instance to come. Let's filter it running. Okay, so While these two come up, let's try to connect. Okay, let's start terminal. Okay, let me create a session first. So I'll take SSH since we are using SSH. Let's go and find out IP address for Red Hat Linux. Okay, this will be my public address, and let's give public address here. So for any Red Hat machines, the username is ec2-user, and here I'm going to use private key. I'm going to load private key from here. So since we are connecting to Red Hat, let's try to connect Red Hat machine. So let's start. It's trying to import. Yeah, successful connection. So let's name this terminal as Red Hat Linux. Okay. So now let's try to create one more session. Let's try to create one more session, and this time I'm going to take Ubuntu machine IP address. So this is my Ubuntu machine IP address. Giving IP for Ubuntu machine, by default the user is Ubuntu. Okay, I'm selecting private key and we are using Ubuntu TildeWebs. Okay. So we have connected to both the instances. You see here it is ec2-user and the IP address is 172.31.95.102. If you see, private IP address will be 172.31.95.102, and for Ubuntu machine it is 172.31.92.43. If you see the private IP address 172.31.92.43. So now we have successfully enabled connections for both the machines. Now we will try to connect these machines one to one. Now first initially let's try with normal user Ubuntu @ now I'm not passing any password or any SSH key. We are using different SSH keys, so it should, let's try what it will show. Let's try for connecting from my Red Hat machine to Ubuntu machine. So I'm giving Ubuntu. Let's give it a try. It says permission denied, which means I'm not enabled. So my Red Hat Linux machine is unable to connect to my Ubuntu machine because keys are not matching. Okay. So let's try from other way around. Let's find the Ubuntu Linux machine IP address. Okay. So SSH ec2-user @ see, both are failing. So my Ubuntu machine is unable to talk to my EC2 machine, and my EC2 machine is unable to talk to my Ubuntu machine. So this occurs when you have when you don't have a proper matching keys, or if you don't have any passwords. So this is the error that we are going to get. Now let's try to enable. Now let's try to create keys, and then we'll copy the public key into another machine that we are trying to connect and try to establish a connection. Okay. Before that, we can connect if we have IP address. If we have private key of Ubuntu machine in Red Hat Linux, private key which we generated, which is nothing but this one. If we have this particular private key in Red Hat Linux, I can connect. I can give it as input and I can try to connect. So in that way I can do it. But assuming that I don't have any of these keys, other way around, means like in Red Hat I don't have Ubuntu, in Ubuntu I don't have Red Hat. So let's try to generate keys. Okay. So normally to generate keys we use SSH key ssh-keygen. Okay, so in this I am trying to create keys, generate keys here in Red Hat Linux, and I will copy the public key in Ubuntu, and I will keep my private key in Red Hat. So normally when you generate SSH keys, so we will get two keys. One is public key and private key. So the name itself says public key can be given to anyone. Private key should not be shared. So if we see here, we are trying to run SSH keygen, and we are using one command to copy public key to the other machine. So in this case, I am copying here. So this command will above command ssh copy id will work only if you have a proper username and password to this machine. So right now we do assuming that we are not having any of the passwords or any of the SSH keys that is going to connect to the other machine. In our case, from Red Hat to Ubuntu, we don't have any passwords. We don't have any common uh, private keys that is going to connect to the machine. So now let's create keys now. To this, I'm just making the terminal to not sleep. So SSH keygen, it will try to generate public and private key RSA key pair. I'm just going to hit enter. I'm not giving any input. I'm going to get another. So initially this is generating private key and it will save it in .ssh folder. So I'm entering again. So if you see now, my private key is stored in .ssh and my public key is also stored there. So we can go and access it. So let's see where it is. cd. Now I am in home directory, home/ec2 user. Since I am in ec2 user, now cd.ssh. I am inside ssh, and if you see here, I have got two keys. One is id RSA, which is private key. The other one with extension of .pub is public key. Now we are going to copy this public key into the other machine authorized keys. So when you want to enable passwordless authentication, the public key should be copied into the remote machine that you wanted to connect. Inside that remote machine, inside the user that you are trying to connect. So to that user .ssh folder, there will be one .ssh folder under home directory of that particular user. Inside that you can connect. If you see here, in my case, it is ec2 user.ssh. Now let's see what is there inside public key. Okay, so public key could be shared. Private key should not be shared. Whoever has this private key can access to your machine, and that is vulnerable. We should not share any of these private keys to anyone. So please be mindful of that before sharing any of this content. Okay, now I have copied this content, means I have copied public key content, and I am going to .ssh. So I am inside this pwd. I am in Ubuntu user. I am going to cd.ssh. If you see, there is no public key or private key. So if you see authorized keys, we have only the one public key, which is Ubuntu drill DevApps. So this public key is nothing but the one that when we created machine, right? When we launched the EC2 machine, that time we will get one key pair, which is Ubuntu drill DevApps. This is private key. This is public key of that private key. So to make any connection between two servers, there should be public key and private key, and it is going to get generated at the same time, and the private key is shared to the user who want to access. In our case, we are generating EC2 machine. We are launching EC2 machine, so we need to have the private key. So they will provide us private key. Public key is stored safely in the machine. So under authorized keys in .ssh folder. So that is what you are seeing this one file. Even here also you can see cat authorized keys. Even here also you were able to see Red Hat Linux drill DevApps, which is this key that when we are launching, it was downloading, right? This is that key. So which is private key. So now we have to copy the private key. Now let me clear this out and cat id rsa.pub. Now let me copy this. This is the private. This is the public key of the one that we generated manually, and we have to copy that in the remote machine. This is the remote machine. From Red Hat we are trying to enable connection to Ubuntu. Now I am trying to connect to Ubuntu, so I am in Ubuntu. Inside Ubuntu I have to copy it in authorized keys. Now let me edit the authorized keys. Normally you can take one backup before corrupting it. That should be the ideal way. Otherwise this is going to get corrupted. In my case I am not taking, but it is always good practice to have one backup. Or let me take backup, move, authorized. Okay, let me copy it. Copy authorized keys into authorized keys dot bkp. Okay, I have backup anyways, so I can restore it if my authorized keys gets corrupted. So meanwhile, let me edit the authorized keys. So I am adding one more file, one more content here. Okay, I have copied the one that we have generated manually. I am saving the file. Now this file is, if you list that file, we have copied the another public key that we have generated in Red Hat machine. Now let's try to access it. So we need to take IP address of the Ubuntu machine. So let's take public IP address. So we have copied public IP address. Now let's do SSH Ubuntu @ see, we have enabled successfully. We have enabled passwordless authentication between Red Hat to Ubuntu. Now if you see, earlier I was in EC2 user, now I am able to access Ubuntu user. We can also, since we are in the same, since this Red Hat machine and Ubuntu machine are in the same VPC, so we can try to access this machine via private key as well, private IP as well, sorry. See, we can, so since both are in same network, we can use private IP of the machine to connect to the Ubuntu machine. So now we are in this Ubuntu. So my Red Hat machine will access Ubuntu machine seamlessly without any password authentication. So passwordless authentication. So I can directly, my machine can directly log in from Red Hat to Ubuntu without any password. So that's how we will establish. So I'm reiterating. So first we will generate SSH keys. So SSH keys will give one public key, one private key. Public key can be shared to any machine or anyone who wants to gain access, or if we want to gain access from our machine to their machine, we can share our public key to them so that they will put it in the authorized key section of that user that they are providing in .ssh folder. So now what we have done, we have generated keys and we got this is public key, this is private key. We copied the content of public key inside .ssh folder of Ubuntu machine, which is under authorized keys. So this is my first key that when we launch machine, we will get this public key and private key is downloaded to us, and this is separate key that I have generated from my machine and from Red Hat machine, and I have copied it and pasted it here. If you see the content .pub, it will be same. So if you see the DNS 172.31.95.102, so 172.31.95.102. So I have copied and pasted my authorized keys, my public key in authorized keys, and now I am able to access easily without any password. So I can use private IP ubuntu. See, I can seamlessly access my Ubuntu machine. So that's how these SSH keys work. Keynotes to take: one is make sure that key that you have copied or private keys should be in uh, should be always public key. It's not private key. So whenever you are generating keys, it should be ssh-keygen, and then when you do that ssh-keygen, when you do that, you will get two things. One is public key and private key. Public key is shareable, you can share it to anyone. Private key is stored in the same machine, and whenever you are trying to access a remote machine, you can easily access. If the public key is copied from source machine to destination machine, on the destination machine we have to copy it under .ssh folder of the user that you are trying. In our case it is Ubuntu user, so under Ubuntu user there is .ssh folder. Under that there is authorized keys, in that we will keep it. So if you see cat authorized keys, and if you see pwd slash ubuntu update ubuntu.ssh. So this is how we are going to enable passwordless authentication. So keynotes: never share any private key to anyone under .ssh. This file, this will be the private key. Public key is safe to share. You can share it because you need access. And about optional, we can, once this passwordless authentication is enabled, we can disable password based authentication under etc ssh file. For directory we have sshd-d1 configuration. We can always go there and try to search for this, and we can update it to no if it is yes. So we can do in that way. For suppose we can take this as an example. So here in this case, if you see the password, I have opened this ssh config file. Under this I am able to see password authentication as yes. Now if I want to do this, I can disable it as no. By default all the password authentications will be no, since it is commented, right? So this is commented. So if you remove this and if you keep it as no, by default it will go. Even if you want to enable, it will be disabled. So that is how we can you can see again. I'm going to show you again. Hd under config. Oh, I forgot to give sudo. Okay, so here by default password, by default for all the AWS machine, it is always password authentication is no. But if you want to enable, you can enable it, because for any of these EC2 machines we are not going to get any passwords, or at least for Linux machines we are not going to get any of these passwords for any usernames. It is always SSH keys, which we are going to get private key and public key stored in the machine. So that is how we are going to log in and see. Right now it is always no, but if you are working for on premises it might be under yes. And if you want to, if you are enabling password less authentication, then you can disable this password based authentication. Even if you see here in the Ubuntu machine, it will be same. By default all the EC2 machines which are from Linux, it will be disabled. See here, password authentication is no, because we are not getting any passwords. So this is how you can distinguish or establish connections between two servers without any passwords. So this is the same concept how Ansible works. So there will be one inventory file, inventory server or Ansible server. So in that we are going to create one keys, and we are going to copy this public key on all the servers. So So if you are working on EC2 machines, then it will be you are going to provision infrastructure through Terraform while creating EC2 machines. So you will feed the key for all the servers that I is going to provision, and your private key will be under Ansible server. So that is how Ansible server will connect all the machines that has this public key, this matching public key. So once you generate any SSH keys, that is very specific, and it will only work for that particular public key, not for every public key. So otherwise you will be getting errors as permission denied, or your connection will not be established. So every SSH keys are unique. Everything that you are generating has a separate pattern and has a passphrases. So it is very important that if you are generating key, it will only work for if that private key will work for only that public key that is got generated with the same command. So that's it. So that's all for this session. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. We are reachable at DrillDevApps @gmail.com. We have all the other social media platforms. We have our own DrillDevApps application in Google Play Store. So feel free to reach out to us for any of these queries. Thank you.